One of the biggest challenges for leaders in any business is building and developing that next group of leaders to either move up in your organization, take on new challenges, lead new teams. So the question is, well, how do I do this? What tools do I provide? What strategies? How do I help teach them to hold people accountable? How to come up with new processes? How to keep their eyes focused on the goals that we need them to do? Well, today, Michael Wood, who's the general manager of Checkered Flag, LandRover, Jaguar, and VW, is going to be here to share his strategies. He's been at Checkered Flag for over 12 years, and he's the perfect person. Someone who started on the sales floor and now is the general manager. What was his path like? What did he learn? What mistakes did he make? But more importantly, how does he build that next round of leaders? And that's what we're going to talk about today on You're in Charge Now What, the podcast that helps new leaders develop the skills to become the leaders that they want to be. So let's dive into today's episode with Michael Wood. All right. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining me. As I said in your intro, you are the general manager at Checkered Flag for Jaguar, LandRover, and Volkswagen. But I just met you, recently at an event. But when I was doing research on you, what's interesting is you've been with Checkered Flag now for, if my math is correct, about 12 years. Is that about right? Okay.
Yeah, that's accurate.
And that's interesting because in automotive especially, we don't see a lot of that tenure, see that growth where, especially from yourself, you moved from a sales associate to, finance to general sales manager, back and forth as you move to different locations, and now you're a general manager. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is this idea of grooming the next generation of managers. And I'm sure what you're going to share applies both in automotive and out of automotive. So for you, when you're thinking of looking for a new manager or someone to put in a position of responsibility, what are some of the traits that you look at or that stand out to you that this person may have the qualities to be a good manager?
I think that's a really good question and something that's not really taken in consideration most often. I mean, typically in our industry, we find that the next person that gets promoted is potentially the highest producing person in that store. So if you're selling the most cars, then naturally you become the next at bat when it comes to who goes into finance in a traditional model. But I think that discounts what really gets work done. Patrick Lencioni states that there's 6 working geniuses that are required to get work done. And just because you have 2 of the working geniuses that make you a really, really good sales associate doesn't mean that your working geniuses are going to align with what's going to make you a really good manager. And so for me, I'm looking at on the floor, does the staff follow you without you having to say anything? Mm-hmm. I.e., do you have the potential to be an actual leader? Because I think that that's one thing that, unfortunately, whether it's this industry or any other industry, we conflate the two things. There's a fundamental difference between a manager and a leader. And most general managers, most CEOs, most vice presidents and presidents, they're really good managers. They're managing a system that was put in place, and they're doing they're doing a really good job at that. Right. And that's needed. What I'm looking for is, do you have the propensity to lead? Do you have the ability to provide a clear vision of what the business is for the staff so they understand that what we're doing? Are you able to hold people accountable for consistent standards of excellence? And are you able to communicate a well-defined set of cultural principles and non-negotiable values? And I think that's one of the most important things for me is the non-negotiable values. They have to come from the top down, and everybody has to buy into them.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm great because a lot of those things are on my list. So let's touch on that, the values. And the like you're saying, these are the non-negotiables. And I've heard that before. And I agree with you. I think it has to come from the top down. You can't be someone who's leading a team who's trying to hold people accountable, and then the people above you are going to say, well, they sell a lot, or they do this, and they let them wiggle out of that. But in the case of you, or for Checkered Flag where you are, give them an example, because someone who's listening to this goes, that sounds good, or that sounds really important, but I don't know what that means. So can you give me a specific example of a non-negotiable?
A non-negotiable for me is treating a client with courtesy. And by client, that's interchangeable from the actual people that come in and transact with us to also your colleagues, your associates. So any level of I'm trying to think of the proper word here, but any level of rudeness, if you will, towards each other it's a non-negotiable for me. We
Right.
spend 40 to 50, and if you're a service consultant, 60 to 70 hours a week here. We have to be able in an environment where common courtesy is just that. It's quite common and it's expected amongst each other because at the end of the day, I want a team that's going to take care of the client. And that team is only going to take care of the client when they know that I'm going to take care of them. And I'm only going to take care of them when they know what my values are and that they are non-negotiable and that they're going to stand behind me with those things. So for me, like, it's certain things like riding with the client when, if you're a product specialist, for instance, on the test drive, that's a non-negotiable. Nobody hands somebody keys and tells them to go. COVID is over. We don't have to worry about that anymore. It is
Mm-hmm.
a non-negotiable for me. For a sales manager, it is a non-negotiable for me that you take the client out while you're doing the appraisal. I don't want the Wizard of Oz type appraisal
Right.
processes where you disappear with the keys for 30 minutes. Maybe you threw them on the roof, so hopefully they don't leave, or any of the old school tactics. I want the client out there with the advisor, with the team leader, and they should be a collaborative type thing where I'm sitting there and we're talking about it, and I'm using a tread depth gauge, and I'm showing you, well, ma'am or sir, your tires measure at 3/32, and state minimum is 2/32. However, checkered flags minimum is 5/32. So we're going to need to replace those. And on the back of the clipboard we have commonly used price items that are in reconditioning. And we'll look at them and say, all right, well, you've got a 16-inch rim. Average tire price is $220. So we can both agree that's going to be about $440 to replace those tires. And you can understand just in hearing all that why that would be such a non-negotiable, because it's a differentiator. It points you out to be something that the rest of the market is not willing to do. And quite candidly, it's just better for the client. Why do they not have to be involved in that? Why shouldn't they be involved in that?
Right.
So I guess that's a couple examples of
No,
non-negotiables for
and,
me.
and what strikes me when you're talking about this, and I hope the audience hears that, is it's a level of respect. And I think that it's respect for your coworkers, respect for everybody's piece or part of the success of the company. It sounds like if I'm a salesperson all the way down to someone who's washing the cars, no one is more important, but we all need to work together and do, because without one, the other doesn't function. Or this idea of communicating and respecting the customer to be able to share what you do, share where they're at. There is nothing behind, as you said, the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, where someone doesn't understand that and then they feel uncomfortable. It's a respect, it's an education. I like that a lot. So, and then one of the other things you said, which I agree with you, I think is a understanding of where you look for talent. I was taught by one of my mentors. He asked the question, if you're looking for someone to lead a team, if the current team leader is away, who does the team go to answer questions? And a
Exactly.
lot of times it's not the top performer, because this person has the qualities that a lot of people would look for: is patience, I can communicate, I'm approachable, I'm knowledgeable, all of those things that you're hoping as a leader, which focuses on growing teams, versus managing, which is managing a system. And I think that's a differentiator. I like that. But you did use the word, which gets thrown around a lot, this idea of accountability. So for you, how do you, when you're grooming and coaching the next round, or even for yourself as a leader, how do you hold people accountable? Because new managers who are listening to this, I just had a conversation with someone previously I was coaching with, maybe last week, and they were torn. They said, I don't know how to manage or fall in the middle where I'm either too easy or I'm so strict that someone's going to think that I just don't care. So how does one create a sense of accountability with being able to coach someone without going to one of those two extremes, which I think defeats the purpose?
I agree. And I think the way you do it is through, the term servant leadership, but to a different degree. Just this morning, I got my staff together at JLR, and I admitted to them that I had not recently given them a list of my non-negotiable values. And so it's illogical for me to think that they would then be able to deliver on those things. And so I brought them all together and I admitted my fault right in front of them.
Right.
And I think that that's something that too many leaders are unwilling to do, is they think that because I'm now in this position of management and or leadership, that that means I can't make mistakes. Well, fail just stands for first attempt in learning. And so I'm happy with failing. I, in fact, think that I grow the most when I fail.
Right.
So I want my staff to see that although my title might be general manager, I fail too. And being open with that and accepting that and being able to talk about it is how you grow from it. Trying to hide from my failures would only try to make me something that I'm not. It would make me fake to my staff.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
we just had Sarah Ciociola on our last episode. She talked about that as well. When she first stepped into leadership, she thought she had to be perfect, and she was afraid to admit. But once she got past that and said, "We're all working together, and I'm learning from you as much as you're learning from me. I'm just bringing a different set of experiences or another piece to our success." I think that's really important, and for you to stand in front of them. But let's talk about that accountability in the day to day. When
mhm.
you're seeing your team or an individual underperforming or not achieving what you need, how does what's your process? So for someone who's listening to say, what are some of the steps that you would do to discuss that performance, give them feedback, or how would you hold them accountable in order to help them grow?
So I would first look for is like, is this normal for that person? Like, have they been consistently an underperformer? And if they are, then as long as you've checked the box, you've done everything to make them successful, then it's time to promote them to a new position outside of the organization. But if it's somebody that this isn't the norm for them, you need to lean into the emotional intelligence side of things and try to figure out what's really going on. The best parallel I can make for you is like when you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off. Your initial response is, that person, I can't believe they cut me off.
Right.
But the reality is that maybe his wife's in labor and he's trying to rush to the hospital because he wants to get there to see his first child born. And it's not about me at that point. So what they need to recognize, what we have to recognize is that typically when a person who has been doing the job appropriately and well for a time being is off, something else outside of the job is going on. They
Right.
just didn't all of a sudden learn or not learn, unlearn how to do their job. There's something else that's pressing on them. And that's where you go from being a manager and a leader, because you're showing some empathy right there to say, hey, listen, Mr. So and so, this isn't like you. What's going on? Help me help you out. You don't have to go in and yell at them and be like, oh, you didn't make all your calls today, or all your tasks aren't complete today, because you're not helping the situation, because you don't know what's really going on. So it's almost like you need to understand the underlying why and the change that has occurred so that you can help them through it. Because I don't like to use the word family, because I don't think that's necessarily a healthy thing for a business to use.
Right.
But we're the closest thing to family that you're going to have if you work in a dealership or any other business like this. And so you should have some empathy for that person and say, hey, what's going on? What can I help you with? How can I help you get through what's going on so we can get you back to the glory days that you had? And in that conversation, you don't even have to talk about the fact that they didn't make the phone calls. They know. They know that they're not doing the tasks. They know they're not doing what they need to do. But what they're doing in not doing those things, they're saying, hey, Mike, or hey, whomever, I need help. And if you're
Right.
smart enough to be able to listen to what they're actually saying, you're going to get them through it significantly faster. You're going to get them back on track and being productive. And most importantly, you're going to get somebody that's really going to buy into you as a leader, because you had the opportunity to break them down and you chose not to. You chose to ask questions to understand them. And that makes them feel like you're looking at them as a human as opposed to a widget.
That is so important, and I hope those of you listening really understood what you just said, because and what I appreciate, because I agree wholeheartedly with that approach, is that if someone's newer and they're failing or not achieving, it potentially could be they forgot what you were taught them and they're afraid to ask you because, 2 months in, if I go back and say, hey, Michael, I forgot what I'm supposed to do, they're afraid I'll get fired. But someone who's long term, you're right. It's no longer about what the task is or what the process is. They know that. But if you're a one trick pony and all you as a manager goes is yell how many of these you have to do, what you're supposed to do, the person in their head is going, see, Michael doesn't understand me. And it pushes them away versus saying, listen, this isn't you. You know how to do this. You're not doing this. What's going on? And it becomes this person to person caring that I agree with you. I think that builds such trust, such connection, such willingness to, now I'm committed to Michael and the team to fight through the tougher times because he committed to me by just being a human being and being open to say, you know what, go home and see your family. You know what, take the time off, do whatever you need to do. I think that's so important. And I agree with you. I don't think many people spend that time to ask those questions. They're so hell-bent on, you got to just keep doing your job. It doesn't make any sense to me.
100%. And to those that are listening that think that like once you become a manager that you're automatically going to have those skill sets, I can tell you firsthand, you're not. I was that manager when I first got the title that was command and control and that was bark and bark and bark. And I created this environment of fear that was highly productive, but it was very unhealthy, not just for myself, but for everybody that worked for me. And my mentor, his name is Pete Lively. He broke me down and he told me every which way to Sunday how wrong I was in my approach to management. And not so many words said that you may become a great manager, but you will be a terrible leader if you continue down this path.
So that brings me to that point. I'm glad you touched on this. So walk us through your evolution, right? Because again, as you just said, when you started, a lot of times we mimic the managers that we see. We think that's what management is or leadership is. And especially over the last 12 years, how has the automotive industry or just, business in general changed? But for you, what were, besides that one conversation, before you had the conversation, were there times where you felt, I don't think this is working, or you just doubled down? So talk to me about your evolution as a leader.
I honestly felt what I was doing was right. And I think to your point, it's because I grew up in the traditional model. I had an older GM at that time, and it was just very 1970s-ish car dealership culture, if you will. And so when I got into management, I'd only been in the car business for about 9 months. So I didn't have a lot of experience. So with that tied into the fact that I was now a finance manager, I felt like I didn't have the respect, which I probably didn't and shouldn't have had because I hadn't even been in the business for a year. So I felt that the only way that I could do it was through command and control. And I had a very seasoned sales associate, been in the business for about 25 years, only been a salesperson. And I had one of those blow up moments on him, and he took it very well. And then he walked into my office about 10 minutes later, and he's like, "Mr. Wood, can I just talk to you real quick?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "Listen, I'm going to give you the respect your title deserves." He goes, "But if you continue to talk to me like that, we're going to have a problem, and I'm probably not going to work here anymore." And it was conversations like that that made me realize that I was going down the wrong path. And then Pete said to me one day, he goes, "You need to look at it this way. When you get promoted into management, this is an opportunity to be the manager that you always wanted to work for." And that was when like the light bulb went off. I was like, oh my goodness. So I don't have to follow the path of these people anymore because it's what I've seen. I can actually be the person that I wanted to work for those 9 months when I was on the floor. And then he started feeding me books and everything like that. And then I grew emotionally as a person. And I know it's like taboo to talk about that, but I think it's really important that as you become a manager and you move up the ranks, that you understand that your technical acumen is not the only thing that you need to hone. Your emotional intelligence is as equally, if not more important than anything you will ever do. And I would even proffer the fact that some of the greatest leaders we know may not be the most technically savvy in the field that they're in, but they understand people, and that's how they're able to lead.
I agree. And what I like about what you just said was this idea of I could be the person that I wished I worked for. And when I do management training and I train new leaders, and when I come into businesses, that's what I do. One of the first things I do is I tell them to take a piece of paper, cut it, put a line down the middle. On the left side, write down of the managers or leaders or people that and even if you didn't work for them, the leader, what were some of the things they did? Not, literal what they did that made you feel that way. And they would struggle. They'd write down a few things. Then I said, okay, write down the things that the managers that you hated to work for, what did they do? And that was the longest list, fastest list. And then
I probably ended up on that list.
right. And I said, okay, here on that right-hand side, your first thing is don't do those things, because
Yep.
if they bothered you, they bother other people. And the light bulb started to go off. Then the question, then what they lean into, what you were saying is, well, then how do I do the ones that I wish I could be if I don't know how to? And that's where finding a mentor, like you were saying, where someone's going to give you books, or you put in the work to learn, because nowadays there's so many, places, even like this podcast, where people can come and listen and learn. I think it's really important to have those mentors, but lean into what made you inspired to go to work, like to go to work, and as best you can, stay away from those things that irritated you. So with that thought, I hear a lot of things going on now that, oh, the generations have changed and all these people are all different. Now, I probably would challenge that to say my father's generation looked at my generation and said, oh, these people are not the same as us. And everybody goes down that line. But for you, with the amount of people that you have working under you in various positions, is there something, so different with the newer generation who's coming in? Is it they're just more informed, they have more options, or, was it that, no, we should have been doing this always, we just didn't do it? What's your thought on that?
I think the latter is definitely the point there. It's very easy to sit there and blame the generation that's coming in as to why we can't be successful, because we're not willing to look in the mirror and say, hey, we were culpable for the reasons to why they aren't being successful, or why they don't want to come to this industry. I mean, listen, I'm not blind to the fact that our industry has a very negative connotation to it,
Right.
because we lack, one of the most important words in humanity, which is trust. I wake up every morning and I hope that I can trust myself to make the right decisions. I can trust myself to eat the right foods and not go to McDonald's, or trust my wife to do the right things, or whatever it is. Trust is inherently a massive part of our life. And in this industry, it's just absent. Customers don't trust us. Management doesn't trust the product specialist. Trust. It's just not there. And so one, you can extend that trust and give them the opportunity to grow and fail. But, it's not the generation. It's really not. It is us. And anybody that continues to sit there and blame the generation, I'll show you my number one sales associate on my JLR floor. He's 22 years old. Tell me it's his generation. I'll tell you you're wrong.
Right.
Charles Munger said one of the most powerful things I've ever read: never underestimate the value of incentive. So if your pay plan is not incentivizing the staff to the results that you want, change it.
Exactly.
Fix it. And then figure out what that incentive is. I had an old car that was sitting on the lot, and I did one of the old school things. I put $500 on the hood, and I said, if it sells today, you get $500. Well, guess what happened? It didn't sell, because the average age of my sales staff is below 30, and that wasn't what incentivized them.
Right.
So the next time that opportunity presented itself, I said, well, you know what? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So maybe try a different incentive. So I put a 3-day off on there instead of $500. That car sold. It sold real quick. And so what that means is that in that particular instance, I recognized that the incentive that I was offering didn't align with the players that I had in place.
Right.
And so you shouldn't expect it to work. You've got to make sure those incentives are ones that they want to go after, ones they want to have to reach for and go and get. And I think far too often we just sit there and we blame the generation instead of taking a real holistic approach to our business and saying, all right, well, could we do things differently? Can we do things better?
Right.
Can we provide a point of differentiation in the marketplace that will make those talented people want to come in? Can we change our schedules like the Walzer Group has and offer 4-day work weeks so that we can incentivize people and the highest talented sales associates to come work for them? I commend them for that. I think that's the outside of the box thinking that is going to be required to continue the dealer franchise model. And I've said this before, but I believe that we're in an existential battle for the existence of the dealer franchise model. And the only way we do that is by delivering exceptional hospitality and experiences for our clients that we have never done in the past.
Yeah. And what made me think of something while you were talking is I was at an event speaking, and there was someone one of the keynote speakers was, talking. He was sort of the person who talked about the younger generation. And what he said, which struck me, he goes, too often we think of generations as vertical, right? Here's a generation, generation, generation. And he says, I get offended as I think he was a Gen Z or whatever, a Gen X, whatever it was. He goes, I get offended when people say we're as a generation are lazy. He goes, I'm not lazy. Look at me. I'm not like, he goes, I have a lot of friends who get offended at that. He goes, the way we should be thinking about generations are horizontal, because in every generation, there are high performers, mid performers, and low performers. And I was saying to someone who was with me, I said, he's right. I know a lot of people my age who I would consider lazy. And I know a lot of people who are in the younger generation who work for me. I have a lot of people who are in their 20s and they're hard chargers. They want to succeed. They want to do better. They don't also want to be locked in with the people as everyone's lazy. So I think you're right. But I think you've taken it one step further. Also, it is to say, what is going to incentivize someone? Because at different stages in our lives, other things motivate us. Maybe money does, but maybe time off does. Maybe, getting lunch free for a few weeks who knows, but it's up to you to constantly create that environment. Circling all the way back to what we talked about initially, is creating that environment, that culture of respect, culture of listening, culture of we're going to all work together in order to create environment for our clients, for our staff, that we can thrive and we can grow, and customers want to come, other people want to come work, because it's a great environment to do business and also to have a career. So as you then look at what you've done now as a leader, if you have a brand new leader in your organization, or maybe, someone asks you, someone outside of your own organization, and saying, if I'm going to be a leader, I want to be a leader, what's one or two things that you think are the initial building blocks that will give them a good, strong foundation?
I've never met anybody that I consider to be a good leader that is not a voracious reader. If you're not a reader, figure out what you have to do to become one. Whether it's, I can't read off of e-readers. I have to have the tangible satisfaction of turning the page.
Right.
It just goes from my childhood. My mom was a manager at a Walden Books, and I spent a lot of time there as a kid. And I just have this affinity for physical books and everything like that. Whereas Mr. Schneider, he likes to read off of an e-reader. Figure out what it is, audiobooks, whatever it is, podcasts, whatever you're doing. If you're not constantly downloading new data and new ways of thinking into your mind, you're never, ever going to be a leader. You might be a manager, but you will never, ever be a leader. I honestly can't think of anything more important than that.
And I love that, because, and one thing that I'm a voracious reader as well. And depending if I'm traveling and I don't want to carry heavy books, I will do some off of the iPad. I'm not really good with audiobooks because my mind will drift. For me, physically, I need the books, and I get the highlighter and I do that. But I think also being willing to allow yourself to say, I disagree with this book. Sometimes everybody reads a book and they think, oh, well, this is I guess I have to change my views. It's okay to say, oh, I already know that, so that's good. Or I disagree, or that's not right for me. I think that also over time, when you're able to have a conversation and find what works for you, I think that's really good. But I agree with you. It's so much easier now to get information, but there's, sometimes there's so much information, it almost can be daunting to decide where I start. So also, for me, I recommend people find a mentor, lean into
I'd say
someone.
the second thing, it definitely would be a mentor, because Pete definitely put me down the road of what books to read. He was giving me Principles by Ray Dalio, Factfulness by Hans Rosling, just to name a couple books to start me out. And, from reading those books, it then expanded. I typically would read about history. I'm a big David McCullough guy.
Mm-hmm.
I love U.S. history and everything like that. And I wasn't doing a lot of developmental type reading. And so now I've gotten into this cadence where I'm 2 developmental books, 1 personal book, 2 developmental books,
Right.
1 personal book. And to your point, just because it's written down and printed on a page does not make it the end all be all. But what it should do is it should get those synapses firing to be like, all right, well, I disagree what's written here, but let me go find some other points of fact to support why I disagree with it. and not just run off on my own thought process and say, well, I disagree, so I'm right now. You know, it's kind of this web that develops when you start to read a book. You know, like, all right, I'm supported by what this read. You know, recently, last year I read Unreasonable Hospitality. I thought it was one of the top 30 books I've read of the last 30 I've had. I bought it for every one of my managers for Christmas. I have required them all to read it. You know, I've gone to a 2-day Unreasonable Hospitality clinic with Will's team. As you saw, we got to meet him and see
Right.
him at the SoduCon. I'm going to the JLR conference next month, and he's going to be the keynote speaker there. So he's been really impactful on me on the way I think about operating my business. And so after reading his book and learning more about him, well, I recently bought Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table.
Oh, it's a great
And
book. Great book.
Phenomenal book. And it's crazy that it was written almost 20 years ago, too. And the fact that everything he was doing, I mean, this was the 80s and the 90s. I mean, the man was just an innovator in how he thought. And I would have never gotten to that book had I not read Unreasonable Hospitality. And I didn't have a point of contention with Unreasonable Hospitality. I had an insatiable appetite to understand and learn more about how I can transfer that into the automotive industry, which led me into additional books. So that's why I say I think you have to be a voracious reader. And to your point, a mentor would be great to get you set along the way. You know, the books that Pete started me with, those are the same exact books I start anybody I promote into. I give them Factfulness, I give them Ray Dalio's Principles, and now I've added Unreasonable Hospitality to that repertoire.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my oldest friends just came in today, and he's applying to start selling cars here. And I gave him a copy of Unreasonable Hospitality. I said, before you start, you need to read this book. And I think we need to start approaching the industry that way. It's, you know, you read Setting the Table. It's that 49, 51%. I want to look for 49% technical acumen, but 51% hospitality. The fact that how you can take care of people. I can teach you how to sell a car. I can teach you how to take an internet lead. I'm going to have a hard time combating against the nurture that created you into the inhospitable person that you are today.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm not willing to try, but if I meet you and I'm in an interview and I'm asking you questions to try to discern your level of hospitality, that's going to be a red flag, non-negotiable for me. But if you show me in that interview that you have the propensity to learn on that side of the things, and you say, hey, but I've never sold a car before in my life, I'm like, perfect. You're exactly who I'm looking for. You're a clean slate when it comes to the auto industry, and you understand hospitality. And that's exactly what he was. He's coming out of the restaurant industry, and he understands hospitality so much that the week before he came to see me, the manager of our BMW store was trying to recruit him at the restaurant. So it's like, you've got to look for those things, and reading. I cannot stress it enough.
And so just a little side note, I read that book because I knew Danny Meyer. I actually worked for his mentor. I almost worked for Danny at his first restaurant,
Union Square Cafe.
Union Square Cafe. I actually applied for the job, and then his mentor's restaurant, they got me before he did. But I had a lot of people. I've met Danny before, and when I read Setting the Table, it just made sense. But I came from the hospitality industry, and coming into automotive, I find a lot of similarities in automotive. So when I walk into a busy showroom, I feel very comfortable just because you see the similarities of a lot of processes, a lot of structure, but every day could be a little bit different. And I think to your point is leaning into hospitality. I think those will be in this case, the dealerships that will be successful, because that idea of just transactional, you'll win one time potentially, but you're not going to go back over and over and over again. You're not going to recommend it. And I think we especially now with inventory levels back up to somewhat of a comparable level across multiple locations, now it is going to go back to hospitality, because at the end of the day, I can get it in 2 or 3 places. Who do I want to spend time with? Who's going to treat me well? And I think the more, as you said, the more that you can focus your team on hospitality first, I think that's such a huge win. But the other thing I would recommend to the listeners based on that is when you go outside of, even for all your sales team, when they go on vacation and when they go to restaurants, what are people doing in those industries that make you feel good? And then say, could we do that here? Right. And then
yes.
And then same thing is if somebody that made me uncomfortable. Are we doing anything in our processes that could be that? And I think those are great exercises, but the reason why it works in your store is you believe that, you want to hear that, you want to have that conversation where someone else would be just sell the car.
Right. 100%.
Great. All right. So, see, I knew we'd end up on hospitality. It always ends up there. I was really excited, but this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I was really, yeah, I mean, I know your group for years and we've worked together in the past from a marketing perspective, but meeting you and listening to you on the stage at a SodaCon, and you just have a different perspective. And I said, I really want to get you on here because I think what you've just shared during this time for new managers, it's so critical because it breaks down this idea of I have to have it all done. I have to come into it fully baked. I have to, the idea of faking it till I make it, but that also can lead then into your command and control and just yell and scream. And I'm going to, I am manager. Here's my title. I'm going to beat you over the head with it. I think your perspective has completely changed, and that's great. So at the end of every episode, I ask a couple things. Now you've already hit on one of them, so I'm going to have to change. But beyond, let's do it this way. Beyond the books, because my question always is, what's inspiring you? Let me pivot. What are you working on for yourself that a year from now, you're going to say, I'm glad I invested the time in that?
You're talking business or just personally, or
however you want to go?
I've been really focusing on trying to get really healthy. This job can it can beat you down, and if you're focusing on all the litany of different things that we just talked about, it can be easy to forget about yourself. And so I've been focusing really a lot on not just, eating right. I do hot yoga, meditation, just taking care of myself, because I fundamentally believe that it is impossible for me to take care of the 100 people that work for me or the 50 guests that come through here a day if I haven't taken care of myself first. So I've really pivoted into this whole self-love, and not in a narcissistic way or anything like that, but in a way that's just, am I taking care of myself? Am I eating the right things that I need to eat? Am I making sure that I'm staying healthy so that this body doesn't deteriorate faster than it needs to? And more importantly, so I'm not inadvertently missing days at work, etc. But I've got this real big focus on trying to get healthy. Fortunately, my wife's a physician assistant, so she's beating the drum on that one. I can tell you that right now, because for some reason she wants me around for a little while. But I've been definitely focusing on trying to get much healthier. And again, not just physically, but really mentally as well. Just making sure that I'm taking that time to de-stress.
That's a great answer. Let's talk about you traveled a little bit here, but in terms of traveling, I'm always curious. Is there a place, one that you've been to that you said this was amazing? So that's first half. Second one, is there a bucket list location somewhere that you say, someday I'm going to get there?
So I am a big enophile. Like, I absolutely adore everything and anything wine. So Napa Valley has a special place in my heart. Not to mention the fact that my grandmother used to live about 20 minutes away from Napa. So I have a lot of, experiences and smells that I associate with Napa that bring back an illicit memories that just make me happy. So Napa will always hold a special place in my heart. Last year, I was afforded the opportunity to go to Italy through JM&A, and I absolutely fell in love with that country. Like, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would be moving there in a heartbeat. It's not because I don't love America. I absolutely love
it. Where did you go? Where did you go?
We went to Rome. We went to Florence. In fact, we're going back. My wife and I are going to go back in October. We're going to go do Milan and Florence, but we're going to do a little bit more low key of a trip this time. Check some wineries out and everything. But for me, about Italy, it was just, we talked about respect and we talked about culture earlier. The respect that everybody shows each other there is just, it's amazing. And the culture that they have to take care of each other, and the way the food is, and how it's actually nourishment instead of just something you ate, and just the list goes on and on. I just adore Italy. And then never mind the fact that I think it's like 1,300 and something grapes in the world, and over 970 are grown in Italy, and that's the only country that can say that. So when you got a wine guy, that just speaks right to me.
Well, when you're heading back, you and I will connect you with my brother, who has been going for many years, and he is a wine person as well, as many people know, so that you two will get along very well.
Can't wait.
Last question I want to when it comes to advice, we always ask for advice or we receive advice. Sometimes we get advice that we maybe didn't want. So again, two parts. What's some of the best advice or one thing that someone told you that has served you well? And then also, what was some like a really horrible piece of advice that you think that's not the right path to go? So what's your best advice you've gotten?
You mentioned baking earlier as far as like a leader and stuff like that. Somebody, and I cannot recall who said this to me, but they made the same statement, but they made the statement is that we're constantly baking. And that kind of really resonated with me. And it made me realize that there's no end in sight to this growth pattern. There's no
Right.
stopping. There's no amount of books that I can't read that won't consistently and constantly change me into a better iteration of what I am today. So that really resonated to me as the best piece of advice is just to constantly be open to growth. I used to be very reactionary as a person, and I used to be very shut off in my ways. I felt that it was either my way or the highway. And if you're not on board, then you're wrong. And through that person telling me to constantly grow and through the books that I was able to read, I couldn't help but realize how absolutely, to our points earlier, that I was wrong. Like I was fundamentally wrong on that. And now I kind of, I wake up every morning and I read for about an hour, hour and a half. And I look forward to that time because for me, it's like, what am I going to learn new today?
Right.
And so every day I'm just like, man, what am I going to learn new today? What opportunity to wow a client? And typically those only are presented when a mistake occurs, right? You don't typically get the opportunity to wow a client in a positive way. It's typically a reactionary type thing. And so, I looked at those for a while, and then now I've been recently pivoting into, all right, well, why can't I wow a client when I didn't make a mistake? Why can't I provide little additional things? And whether you watch the show The Bear or read the two books that we were talking about, if you read those two books, you'll understand immediately. You absolutely can. And so I guess
Absolutely.
the idea of continual change and continual growth was one of the best pieces of advice I possibly got, for sure.
Was there any piece of advice that you look back on that maybe you thought was good, but more importantly, maybe it was just a bad piece of advice? Like for me, it was just be happy where you are, and don't do too much, don't stand out. And that always rubbed me the wrong way. Was there anything that you look back on that you say, I'm glad I didn't listen to that and I just kept pushing forward?
I think that to most of the listeners that are on this podcast, they've already made a conscious decision to grow and to be better. So, I commend you for doing that. And you're probably not the people we're going to be speaking to in the next point that I'm going to make. But I think that, any advice that tells you what you're doing isn't right, when you know in your gut that it isn't the stuff to listen to. And I say that because typically the people like us that are trying to make the changes, well, we're not doing it because everybody else is. We're doing it because we're going against the grain. And often when you go against the grain, you're going to be told that you're wrong all the time. And you're going to be told that this isn't the right way, or we've always done it this way. You can't do it that way. You've got to be willing to say, no, I don't care. I'm willing to stand out here on this plank on my own and be damned the consequences, because I have conviction in what I believe. So I guess the worst piece of advice I've gotten is not necessarily advice, but it's when I'm trying to do something that is perceived as very different and I'm being told that you can't do that or it shouldn't be done that way. And I'm just like, no, I'm sorry. I don't agree with you. I think that there is a better way. And I often recently have found that if something I'm doing aligns with something that I'm hearing a lot of people are doing, outside of maybe like the Soda Network and stuff like that, then I'm starting to question whether I'm doing the right thing or not. I think that when I'm doing things that nobody else is doing, then I'm going down the path that is going to lead to growth for myself and for my staff.
That's great. That's really a great point because, in our conferences and things, sometimes we're talking about things that everyone's scratching their head, but 18 months later, everyone starts to talk about it. So then, but if what I really like about it is if it aligns and it just feels right, like, and I think people's guts are wiser sometimes than our brains. And so when you have that sense of or you see that, there's a reason why it's clicking in your head. You may not know why or how, but keep following that path. I agree with that, because if you listen to everybody else, we'll never move forward, because we're falling into everyone else's comfort zones versus going down the road. So this is great. I'm so glad you came here. I want to thank you so much for this. So tell people, how can they connect with you? If somebody has a question, where would they find you?
LinkedIn's probably the best way, and I'm happy to help mentor anybody that wants the mentorship. If you're just looking for books to read, or you're trying to change something in your store and you've got questions and you don't feel like you've got the right person to talk to, I'm happy to talk to anybody that wants to have those kinds of conversations, because I know how valuable they were for me. Like I said before, I was very fortunate. I had a great mentor, and I would not be sitting here today on this podcast if it wasn't for my mentor. So anybody that wants help, whether it's for a minute or for weeks at a time, I'm happy to help. I think that, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I'm happy to help bring up the future leaders, because that's half the reason why I'm in this industry. I don't like the car business the way it has been. I want to change it.
I think that's great. And we'll link up your contact information in the show notes. So again, Michael, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again. I appreciate your time. Audience, you know the drill. Please make sure you like and subscribe. I know there's someone in your network that could benefit from what Michael had to share, so please make sure you share it out. We're here every single week bringing you these types of conversations, tactical ideas to help you become the leader you want. And as I say at the end of every episode, you're in charge. And now you have a few more tools, tips, and strategies to help you become the leader that you want to be. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks for having me.